Welcome. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So if you haven't noticed this already, if you've watched, assuming that you've watched other sessions, you realize that this is a learning session for all of us. It's not like I happen to have a little bit more background, but the truth is that, and I have gone through this material several times, but I also at times struggle with it and need to look at other resources. And so please bear with me. I'm going to start the screen share. And here we are. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. So Hashem spoke to Moses saying, just to recap just a teeny bit, we had another plague that Aaron had to go and stop. There had been a reaction to that initial plague, that initial, with the earth swallowing up Datan and Aviram and the fire coming and burning the people with the fire pans, Korach and the 250 followers. And the people were not happy about that and expressed their anger, and God was incensed at that reaction, was ready to wipe out the Jewish people again. And Moses saw that how, plague started breaking out. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, there were 14,700 people who died in that plague, right? Here we go, Arba'a Asar Elef, 14,000 ushvamaot, above. So Moses tells Aaron to take the fire pan with incense and is able to stop the plague immediately at that point. Of course, a lot of damage done already. We're going to, now we move on to the next stage. What I feel is so helpful about Korach is that we still haven't solved the problem of what, this feeling of mutiny within the camp and how it actually does finally get resolved, and that the resolution is going to be non-violent. You realize that everything up to this point has included violence, and it has not solved the problem. And here we are now going to see a way in which the problem is going to be solved, and in a non-violent way. And I think that's a terribly important lesson from this particular Parsha, because we still try to solve problems with violence, and they really don't solve the problem. So Hashem spoke to Moses saying, Daver el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, v'kach me'itam, and take from them mateh, a rod, a staff, leveit av, a rod for each paternal house, me'et kol nisi'ehem, from each one of their chieftains, leveit avotam, according to their paternal houses, shneim asar matot. We're talking about 12 staffs, 12 rods. Ish et shmo, right? Each person, his name, tichtov al matehu, you should write on his staff. So they're going to identify each staff by the name of the chieftain. Let's see if there's any. I don't believe there's any Rashi on this yet. So one more. Ve'et shem Aharon, and Aaron's name, tichtov al matei Levi. You should then write for the tribe of Levi, ki matei echad, because there is one rod lerosh beit avotam, for each head of their ancestral home. Rashi on this. Let's see where it is. Thought I saw it, and now I'm okay. Maybe there is nothing until 20. Forgive me.
There is.
There it is. I just found it. There's the cursor. Ki mate echad, for one rod. Af al pi shechalaktim lishtei mishpachot. Okay, even though I have divided them into two families, mishpachat kahuna levad. On the one hand, the family of priests, ulevaya levad, and the family of Levites separately. Mikol machom, nevertheless, shevet echad hu. It is nevertheless one tribe, one tribe. So that's explaining that, because you've got Aaron and you've got Levi, the priests and the Levites. What is interesting, what's sort of going through the back of my mind right now, and I don't have a resolution for it necessarily, although maybe there is you realize that Korach was a Levite, and he was mutinying against his cousin, who of course was a Levite as well. And yet here they're all together. Levites and priests are lumped together in one rod. And I'm trying to puzzle that out and thinking, is that very fact part of what is the solution here to removing prejudice and this divisiveness? So just more thought on that one required. V'hinachtam ba'ohel moed. You shall place them in the tent of meeting, lifnei ha'edut, before the testimony. And of course, we're talking about the ark of the testimony. Asher iva'ed lachem shama, where I appear to you. And this little note here is Chatzi HaSefer Bepsukim. We have already gotten to the middle of the book of Numbers when it comes to verses. So these are the middle verses of the book of Numbers. 20, verse 20, V'haya ha'ish asher evchar bo, and when it comes to the man whom I have chosen, the person I have chosen, Matehu Yifrach, his rod will blossom. V'hashi koti, v'hashi koti, and I will cause to abate. Alai from before me, et tlunot b'nei Yisrael, the murmurings of the children of Israel, asher he malinim aleichem, which they murmur against you. So this is a sort of interesting general comment on human behavior and the whole issue of murmuring, and how God in this case is trying to abate that, get that to settle down. And of course, you look at it. I mean, you look at national life, you look at politics, and there's a lot of murmuring going on. And we know that our tradition has no objection to debate. There's no question that things get investigated better, the truth comes out much more frequently in the course of debate and legitimate challenges and things like that. But we also know, we talk about a dispute for the sake of heaven and a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven. And the dispute of Korach is given as the example, the prime example of a dispute not for the sake of heaven. And traditionally having more than one point of view, whether it's progressive versus or liberal versus conservative. If those discussions take place in a sincere and vigorous kind of way, where there's respect shown, it is extremely powerful and very helpful. But when it comes down into personal benefit and basically an act of war, then it's not. And in some ways, this Parsha is so relevant to what's going on in this country right now, and what is good leadership and what isn't good leadership. Verse 20, V'hashi koti, right? So this is an unusual word, and I was fortunate to be able to find a decent translation for this word. So, Kamor. He gives an example. Genesis chapter 8, it looks like, right? Vayashoku hamayim. And the waters, we're talking here about Noah and the flood, and the waters abated. Right? So there's that word, right? And Esther, the book of Esther, chapter 7, the Chamat HaMelech Shachecha, I believe is the word, and the anger of the king abated. So basically cause to cease. Vaydaber Moshe el bnei Israel, and Moses spoke to the children of Israel, Vayitnu elav, and they gave to him, Kol nise'ehem, all their chieftains, Matei lenasi echad, meaning each one giving, each chieftain for one tribe, right? A chieftain per tribe, a rod. Leveit Avatam, according to their ancestral homes, their paternal homes, Shneim Asar Matut, 12 rods, Umate Aharon Betoch Matotam. And the rod of Aaron was put in the middle of their rods. So the very middle was Aaron's rod. The toch matotam. So why does the Torah, in other words, Rashi is going to address, why does the Torah make that specification that his rod was in the very middle of all the others? Hanicho ba'emtza, they placed it in the middle, shelo yomru, that people shouldn't say, mipnei shehenicho betzad shchina parach, that the reason, finding a different reason for its sprouting is because it was placed closer to the presence of the divine. Because remember, they were placing this in front of the ark, and had Aaron's rod been on somehow or other wound up closer to the ark or not been in the middle, right? Even if people hadn't have seen where the rod actually lay, it might have lain furthest away from the ark. But people would then, but if they knew that the rod was intentionally placed in the middle of all the others, they could not say that it was placed closer. They simply couldn't. So there's people look for excuses, right? Vayanach Moshe et hamatot, Moses placed the rods lifnei Hashem, before God, before Hashem, ba'ohel ha'edut, in the tent of meeting. I don't think there's a Rashi on this. No.
Tent of testimony.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Witness.
Sorry. No, you're right. I should have said that. I gave a bad translation. Ohel mo'ed is the tent of meeting. Edut is a different word. Thank you, Lauren. Listen, this is why we study together, so I can be a little more rigorous. Thank you. Vahi mimochorat, and it was on the next day, Vayavo Moshe el ohel ha'edut, and Moses came to the tent of the testimony, in other words, of the ark, where the ark was. Vehine, and behold, indeed, harach mate Haron, the rod of Aaron had sprouted, levet Levi, for the house of Levites, for the Levites. And of course, we know that that entire tribe was separated from all the other tribes. Vayotze perach, it blossomed, right? A flower came forth. Vayatzetz tzitz, and I think here it means, in a sense, it had formed fruit, right? A sprout. Vayigmol shkedim, and it gave forth almonds. Rashi. Let's find the place. Here we go. Vayetze perach, or is it let me make sure. Vayotze perach, excuse me. And it gave a flower. And he says kamash ma'or, which just means, it's exactly what it's saying. In other words, it sprouted blossoms. Tzitz, okay? So this word tzitz is hu chanatat haperi. This is the the setting, I would call it, if I'm using a botanical term, right, of the fruit, keshehaperach nofel, when the flower drops off, right? So this is the stage of growth of the fruit. Vaigmol shkedim, right? It's interesting verb, right? And you're familiar with gemilut chasadim, right? So let's just say, for the sake of translation for the moment, I'll say, and it produced almonds. So now he explains, Keshehukar hapri, when the fruit is recognizable, v'hukar shehein shkedim, and it was recognized that they are almonds, right? Lashon, and he says this word gemul, he says, can be found in Genesis 21, vayigdal hayeled, and the child grew up, vayigmol. It means it was weaned. So it's talking, this weaning has to do with the fact that the child has developed a level of independence that it's no longer requiring its mother's milk to be able to be sustained. So likewise, when it actually becomes an almond, and is getting to a point where it's ripened, it then can be separated from the tree. So it could be that the word gamol there has to do with the fact that these almonds can be plucked, they can be taken from that. So they were in other words, fully ripened. At any rate, I'm also thinking of gemilut chasadim, right? Why we use that verb. And perhaps it has to do, because what it means is, of course, acts of kindness. And I imagine maybe along with that is the idea that a true act of kindness, right? And we talk about that, means that we don't make the person feel obligated to us, because we know, right? It's a technique sometimes to gain favorable treatment, is to do something kind to someone and then expect something in return, because that's a natural human inclination, or it certainly is something we want to develop, is a sense of appreciation. So if you do something for someone and they have a sense of appreciation. But true gemilut chasadim means performing an act of kindness without any expectation or suggestion that you want to be rewarded for it. That's true gemilut chasadim. And that would make sense now as to why we use this particular verb for performing acts of kindness, that's bundled up into this term gemilut chasadim. And that's why we talk about chesed shel emet, a true act of kindness. Interesting. I mean, it just shows you sometimes how the Hebrew language just has there's a lot going on in the actual Hebrew itself. Lashon ze matsui bepri ha'ilan. He says, and this expression of gemilut, right, this gamal, lashon ze, it's found, by the way, of course, that's the Hebrew word for camel as well, and there's probably a reason for that too, but I'm not going to go into that right this second. Okay, we find such an expression regarding fruit of a tree. Kamor, and he says in Isaiah chapter 18, he says, Uvoser gomel yihiyeh nitza, right? So, and the blossom will become a ripe grape. V'lama shkedim, and he asked the question, why in this particular case were we talking about almonds? Why was it that why didn't it create grapes? Why not something else? Why dafka almonds? Hu hapri hamimaher la'afriach. And the reason is that the almond tree is one of the very first to blossom in the spring. It's a very early ripening fruit, and L'hafriach, of course, would be to blossom. It comes up very, very early, like forsythia, right? And they talk. That's why we've got Tu B'Shvat. There's that famous song Hashkedia Porachat. The almond tree is blossoming, and it's actually in some ways a harbinger of spring. So the point is, it's one of the first fruit trees, if not the first fruit tree to blossom, mikol haperot, from all the other trees. And he says, Af ha'ma'orer al ha'kuna. And the message here was that one who ma'orer means to sort of cause trouble about the priesthood, who questions, but more than questions, it's who acts in a way to undermine the priesthood. Lauren, do you have a translation for me there? I just can't think of it right now. Ma'orer.
Yeah, I was looking up camel, so I got away from where you were.
Uh-huh.
So we're likewise he opposes the priest work.
Okay, there it is. So they're using opposes, but it's more than just to oppose. Okay, it's to I'm thinking of undermine, but I'm not real happy with that either. I'll have to look it up.
Can I just tell you what I found with camel, because it would just
Sure.
could be, it's
Come
not
on.
deep,
Okay.
but I was looking up the etymology and I was afraid it would stop at the Hebrew and just,
Mhm.
and then not really translate it. But it said that from Hebrew or Phoenician gamal, perhaps related to Arabic, and they spelled it Jamala, which
Yeah.
means to bear, Bear, like to bear fruit.
Or to bear a burden, right? It's a beast of burden.
Well, for sure, but
Yeah.
it would make sense with what we're studying if it's like to
Right.
bear fruit.
That we are saying that it's possibly a cognate. Okay. I mean, clearly it requires a little bit more investigation. Okay.
Right, but that does go with what we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not an end all or be all explanation, but it's a
Right.
possibility.
Yes. Right. Let me see. Okay. So, right. So we're discussing now, excuse me, why almonds? Why almonds? And he says, because anyone who undermines the priesthood, pur anuto mimaheret lavor, his consequence, right? His punishment will come quickly. The punishment is rapid. Kamoshe matzinu be'Uziyahu, as we find out with the king Uzziah, and this is from Chronicles 2:26. V'hatzarat zarcha b'mitzcho, and the leprosy sprouted or grew in his forehead. V'targumo, and so that's that. And now Rashi says, and the targum here, it's right here. Let me find it. Here we go. V'chapet shigdin is the Aramaic that he's referring to. Targumo. Sorry, have to find the place. Right, and it's Aramaic translation in the Onkelos. V'kapit shigdin. I think, was that what it was? V'chapet shigdin, which means that it created a cluster of almonds. Kemin eshkol, so he says this is like a cluster, an eshkol of shkedim, yachad, together, all together. In other words, these almonds were all sort of bundled together, yachad, together, kefutim, pressed against ze al ze, pressed one against the other. So it's so you can visualize a cluster of almonds here. And I'm going to stop right here. Well, let's see, 1 second. No, it's okay. Let's do one more verse so we can get to Shishi, right? Moses brought out all the rods from before God, Hashem, El Kol B'nai Israel. He presented them to all the children of Israel, Vayiru, and they saw, Vayikhu ish matehu, and each man took his rod. So here we have the proof of who God chose. So a miracle in this way, and it looks like, maybe in saying that each man took his rod, in some ways is an admission, right? That this is what happened, and that in fact Aaron was the selected person. going to stop the share here and stop the recording.